Now, the trade gap between the United States and China, it continues to grow. And my next guest says that the U.S. accounts for almost 90% of China's trade surplus. And he asks, as China's largest customer, why doesn't the United States have more an effect on China's policies? Leo Hindery is the chairman of a U.S. Economy Smart Globalization Initiative. That's at the New America Foundation. He is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and managing director at InterMedia Partners, a media industry private equity fund. Leo, good to have you with us on Bloomberg.
It's always a pleasure to be back.
And in the most recent article that you've written for the Huffington Post, you talk about how long is the United States going to remain a doormat for China. Now, I dare say if we flipped over that doormat, the doormat itself would say made in China. I mean, what's going to actually force a change? It didn't happen with the currency. We waited for that to happen at that G20 Toronto meeting. It kind of happened, and then there was all backtrack.
You know, just on the currency manipulation, Pimm, it's about a 40% undervaluation of the yuan. It has an effect on a manufactured good out of China versus its counterpart here in the United States of about a 25% cost differential, that single item. And the point of the article I wrote is that China, this massive trading entity that's now the second largest economy in the world, just past Japan, second only to ourselves, is in relative balance in trade with every other part of the world in toto and pretty much individually with the United States, where we're responsible for about 100% of its surplus, and they're responsible for about 75% of our deficit. And the problem is we can't ignore it like we have been. It's costing us millions and millions of jobs over the years with sort of no end in sight. We have a massive trade deficit. And most of the women and men listening to the show this afternoon sort of don't see a trade deficit as debt. But it truly is. It's debt that the American people owe this country called China. And how we've paid it is they've accumulated about $2 trillion worth of foreign reserves, mostly U.S. dollars. And if it was done fairly, if we were losing in trade to China fairly, then we have to get our house in order and react that way. If we're losing because of subsidies that are illegal, because of currency manipulation, because of environmental practices that put not just their own country, but our country and the rest of the globe at risk, then we have to address that. And I think the tragedy for me on a personal level is that I was part of the 2008 campaign on behalf of the Democratic side very actively. I helped President Obama in trade and jobs issues throughout that campaign. And I thought we had very specific understandings as to what would happen after this administration got in vis-a-vis this relationship with China. 18 months later, we haven't done a thing.
What happened, though, Leo? I mean, this doesn't seem to be rocket science, does it? I mean, if the Chinese currency is too undervalued, making the products that they produce inexpensive, not because they're any more productive or because they're better at making things than we are, but just because the actual currency is being held down in value by the government, why doesn't someone do something about this? Because
politically we don't have the will. And I thought that the transition to the new administration would bring that political will. I thought that was the promise made in Iowa and Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, in Buffalo, New York, where you and I live here in this state of New York. And the promises were made, but the action wasn't taken. And we have an inordinate influence on the body politic from the multinational corporations who are benefiting from this imbalance. Now, the women and men who are grossly and underemployed in this country today are suffering mightily. And, you know, some people will argue, well, we're getting cheap goods because of this import imbalance. But we tipped that point over years ago. The cost to our nation, Pimm, from losing these jobs, trying to find new ones for these roughly 30 million unemployed women and men, far, far exceeds the benefit that you and I might find from going to Walmart and finding a cheap towel or a cheap robe or you know, a manufactured good.
And it's not just cheap goods such as maybe toys or plastic products or consumer items as you're describing. It's increasingly more highly engineered products, technologically advanced products, because they're getting more sophisticated making these things in China.
Well, their sophistication is acute. but they're also demanding it as a consequence of trading within their country. Take the Boeing Aircraft Company as an example. To sell a Boeing aircraft into China, you have to agree to start making Boeing aircraft in China. I was over there a year or so ago, went to a wing assembly plant that makes wings for the Boeing 737. A year or two from now, the entire Boeing aircraft will be made in China. You know, we watched this in Japan in the 70s, and we wondered, geez, you know, they're knocking off golf clubs and they're knocking off transistor radios. Your point is well made. This isn't shoddy goods, although there is certainly some of that at the low end. This is very high technology goods. So when we look ahead to the dynamic of the United States, our own economy, the jobs that our children and our grandchildren are supposed to have are being stolen at the same pace as the manufacturing jobs of the past generation.
And is it a question of use it or lose it, in the sense that if we don't figure out how to compete on this level, we're going to lose the technical prowess that made it great in the first place?
You can't have three or four things going on at once. This loss of technical prowess that you described, this ever-sustaining trade deficit that we talk about, this massive loss of jobs in this economy. It's a killer combination.
All right, I want to thank you very much, Leo Hindery. Always insightful. Appreciate your bringing this to our attention, talking about the trade deficit with China. And it's good to see you. Thanks for
Pimm,
looking healthy. Great to see you.